Okay, think that's going. All right. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for coming to this is our third winter plant talk for 2025. I'm Michelle DeRusha with Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. Today's topic is the state of the forest with Nebraska State Forester John Erixson. So John was first appointed Nebraska State Forester in 2017, and then in November 2022, he was reappointed to his second 5-year term. So he has been with us for a little while. And since 2017, John has helped guide Nebraska's response to the invasive emerald ash borer, as well as to the increasingly frequent wildfires that the Forest Service has had to contend with. So we'll hear more about that from John about wildfires and other important issues in a minute. But first, just a couple of details. The Winter Plant Talk series is a free series hosted by Nebraska Statewide Arboretum, and we are a nonprofit organization. So if you're not already a member of NSA, you can find out more about our different membership levels and benefits at our website. It's plantnebraska.org/join, and Toby will throw that link in the chat so it's easy for you to access. We record each plant talk, so all registrants will be sent a link to the recording, which will be on YouTube. So even if you can't make it to future plant talk webinars when they're live, if you're registered, you can always watch them later. So that's a nice benefit. You can find out more about our upcoming plant talks at plantnebraska.org/plant-talks. We'll put that link in the chat as well. And then just a reminder, we'll keep our microphones on mute for now. So we'll have a few minutes for questions for John. You can either put them in the chat or at the end, you can turn your microphone on and ask your question in person, whatever you prefer. So with that, I will let John take it from here. Thanks, John.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Happy to be here today and glad you are all able to join us. So I am John Erixson. I'm the state forester, and as Michelle said, I've been state forester for since 2017. And before that, I was the deputy director here at the Nebraska Forest Service for a few years. And prior to that, I was in private industry out in Idaho. I'm a born and raised Nebraskan, so it was a thrill for me to come back to Nebraska and join you all and be able to contribute to the forests of Nebraska. So what I will do today in the plant talk is talk a little bit about the agency and what we do, talk a little bit about our forest, and then go into some challenges that we have ahead of us. So we'll jump into that and start out with our mission statement for the Nebraska Forest Service. So our mission is to enrich the lives of all Nebraskans by protecting, restoring, and utilizing Nebraska's trees and forest resources. So we work with landowners and communities and partners and agencies and NGOs across the state to carry out our mission. And our vision is to inspire others and assist others to create and sustain healthy and productive forests. We do this again by working with those folks that are really interested in their forests and working with the willing, if you will, on the different projects that we do. And our core values are the integrity in all interactions, responsible and sustained stewardship, and outstanding service to Nebraska's needs. So we're really trying to work with those different organizations, those different individuals to carry out our mission across the state. And as we look at how we do that a little bit deeper, we really start with a 10-year forest action plan. And this is a published document. It's something that's updated every 10 years. The last revision was back in 2020. And that revision really started out on the ground, and we talked with our partners and landowners from each area of the state to capture the needs of those individual areas. So as we look at different corners of the state, we talked with our partners. And then our strategic plan, which is due to be updated this year, really ties the work that is identified in our forest action plan back to the individual foresters that are working out there, and they have operational plans that support the strategic plan and support the forest action plan. But really, there's five mandates that we are required to do. Some of them are federal, and one of them is state. Um, and that is just to provide rural forestry assistance. So both state and federal law has mandates for us to carry out the mission around rural forestry. The urban and community forestry is the same. There's state law and there's federal law that require us to carry out the mandates associated with that. Forest health is another area that has both state and federal requirements. Rural fire protection and control is another one that carries out that state and federal mission. And then for the state of Nebraska, we have our forest products and utilization efforts that are a state law that really looks to utilize materials that come off our forest and add value to those. We are part of the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources here at the University of Nebraska. So we're a state agency that's administratively housed within the university system. So taking a quick look, touching on rural forestry, our foresters work with landowners to help them achieve their goals for their properties and maintain the health and the productivity of those forests. You know, as you look at the picture on the left here, you have a ponderosa pine forest, and then you have a hardwood forest, and it transitions down into some rangelands. So as the landowner is visiting with our foresters, they look to discover the goals that the landowner has for that property, and then provide technical assistance and financial assistance to help the landowners achieve those goals. The picture on the right happens to be a hardwood forest that has eastern red cedar encroaching into that. So it's a different forest situation, different goals and objectives for that particular piece of property. So we work with that landowner to develop the plan and then work to help them accomplish those goals that they've identified for that property. Within our rural forestry program, we also have agroforestry program, and our agroforester is someone that has worked all across the country training other foresters on agroforestry systems. She has extensive knowledge in this, and what we're really looking at with agroforestry is what are the other uses for the property that could be considered as you're managing that property. So it could be as simple as you have a ponderosa pine forest, you have an understory of native grasses, and you graze that area. It's a silvopasture kind of activity. Or it could be a situation like you see in the lower left here, where you have some hazelnuts planted, and in between those rows of hazelnuts, you cut the grass and sell hay off the property. Or it could be a situation like you have beans and a windbreak up in the upper left corner there that helps the producer maybe have less inputs into their production lands and protects that property from wind and soil erosion, etc. Our urban and community forestry program does the same thing, except we try to do this in our communities. We've all seen downtown situations where there are no trees in the downtown, and we've seen situations where there are trees in our downtowns, and it's it's not just specifically downtowns, but it's all across the community. And our foresters provide both technical assistance to communities, and they provide financial assistance to communities to help support the healthy, productive forests in our communities, help create green infrastructure, and keep those communities resilient and growing. So some of the advantages of having a downtown like you see on the right side of the picture there with the trees is, people spend more time out there. People tend to spend more time shopping in those areas. They spend more money. So there's economic benefits, but there's also human health benefits too, of having trees. There's studies out there that show that if somebody is in a hospital recovering from surgery or something, the recovery time is less if they have got a view of a natural area. There's many studies out there that look at the crime statistics of areas that have trees and don't have trees, and some of the hypotheses behind the lower crime rates in areas with trees is, people are outdoors more and they're more involved in their communities. So there's all kinds of benefits, um, economic and environmental, social benefits associated with having thriving communities forests that we have across the state. And in Nebraska, we have 489,000 acres of community forests. And I'm sure if all of us looked out our windows, we would see part of that community forest, that's around us. So, some of the things that our foresters do, we work with other professionals, the green industry, to, train them and help them become better at what they're doing, provide information around different aspects of forest health and disease that is out there. We try to connect people with those trees in our communities, and have areas like you see on the right there where children are out interacting with nature and enjoying nature. And some of that training is also, for the general public, trying to get that information out with tree care workshops and the like, to help make that connection back to our forests and back to our trees. Our forest health program is similar, where we work with cities, communities, rural landowners all across the state to help them prepare for whatever the next forest health problem might be. We're all familiar with the insect that is on the lower left side there, that's the emerald ash borer. That picture's bigger than they actually are. They're probably about 3/4 of an inch in size. But the emerald ash borer first showed up in the United States back in 2012, and or I'm sorry, 2002. And planning has been going on how our communities and landowners are going to deal with this particular insect when it gets to their neighborhood. And of course, we had emerald ash borer show up here about 10 years ago, not quite 10 years ago. And it's continuing to spread across the state, with populations found out in North Platte now, as well as along the eastern side of the state here. So the planning part of that, working with communities to plan on their response for emerald ash borer, but also, what do you do post ash borer after your ash trees are gone? Um, Another insect that we're keeping an eye out for is the one on the right side there. That happens to be the Asian longhorn beetle, and that one likes to attack maple trees. So we're certainly concerned about that. We're monitoring that, and we'll continue to follow that over time. Kind of a new one that's in the United States is the one in the upper left. And last year, they did find a mature moth down in Kansas. It was dead and thought to be brought in on a car. So,
John, I'm sorry I accidentally muted you when I was letting someone into the waiting room. Can you just unmute? Sorry
okay.
about that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So anyway, going back to this spotted lanternfly in the upper left corner here, they did find a mature moth down in Kansas here this last year. It was dead and it was thought to be brought in on a car from somebody traveling up in the northeast part of the country. But the spotted lanternfly is a insect that targets tree of heaven as its favored species. Tree of heaven is an invasive species in Nebraska, and might think, well, okay, well that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they showed up here. But after they decimate the tree of heaven population, they go after everything, including rusty cars and the like. They'll eat anything, as I guess is the way I'll put it. So it's definitely something we're worried about. It's a big problem in Pennsylvania. It's not a problem here yet, but it's something we're monitoring. Another one that we keep an eye on is the walnut twig beetle. The beetle itself is not necessarily the problem. It's the fungus they spread when they go from one tree to the next. And walnut twig beetle has been found in Nebraska, but the fungus has not. So right now we're just monitoring that. There's other issues that we continue to monitor, and issues like herbicide drift that are damaging trees and those kind of things. So our forest health people are working across the state trying to stay up on new problems and monitor old problems and provide assistance to the people of Nebraska to prepare for whatever the next problem might be. We also have our fire program, and there are several things within our fire program that we do. Our fire program, first of all, is we operate single engine air tankers, and what those are fixed wing aircraft, and I'll show you a picture here in a few minutes of those. But they're fixed wing aircraft that drop fire retardant on fires or adjacent to fires to help our rural fire departments and control wildfires in the state. Right now, we have five seat bases that are spread across the state. These are permanent bases that are in McCook, Alliance, Ainsworth, Scottsbluff, and Chadron. We also have a large mobile seat base, which is right now up in O'Neill, but we moved that one around to the next area of highest need is the way we look at it. So if we've got a gap somewhere in our coverage and that area is showing um, high fire potential, then we'll move it to that area. And those seat bases are really set up to um, operate for more than one operational period. And so if the fire is there today, we can manage up to five aircraft out of one base for more than 24 hours. And at that point, we start running low on our um, concentrated retardant and have to start moving things from one base to another. And we'll use the nurse trailer that's up in Valentine to move that. It's called LC 95 from one base to the next to keep them operational. And then we have two what we call mini mobile seat bases, and those can support an aircraft for actually two aircraft for a day out of any base in across the state. So any airport that has a long enough runway, we can move those in there and support fire operations. Here this last year, um, our seaplane supported 34 different fires in Nebraska. And on the map there, you can see where some of those are, but you can see they're up in the Niobrara Valley. They're in the Pine Ridge. They were down in the Wildcats and the Panhandle, and then down towards um, McCook area in the southwest corner of the state there. And on those fires, they used about 33,000 gallons of retardant, and a gallon of liquid concentrate is diluted by about with 8 gallons of water to make the concentrate that the aircraft will drop. And I mentioned that there's we can support 5 aircraft out of one seat base for more than an operational period, and we do that by actually borrowing and trading aircraft from one state to the next. So we monitor where other seaplanes are in South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado. We've used aircraft out of Kansas before, and we've had our aircraft fly in South Dakota, Wyoming, and Colorado as well. And so what we do is if Nebraska's doesn't need it and South Dakota does, we loan it to them for the day, and that aircraft will go up there and fly out of there, and they do the same back for us. And here in the upper left and the lower right are two different aircraft that are under the seat-based program. And that you can see they're dropping the retardant on a fire. But within our fire program, one of the things we have to do and we continue to do is we track the number of fires, how many acres have burned in a year, and this is information that's provided to us by the various fire departments across the state. And the reason we need this information is it demonstrates the need for and demand of time that our firefighters have across the state. So when federal funding becomes available, like the volunteer firefighter assistance grants that become available, it's really calculated out on how many hours the departments use, how many calls do they have in a year, what equipment they used, what kind of structures were threatened, what type of vegetation burned. And that's all calculates into how many dollars that come into the state that turn around and go straight back out to our volunteer firefighters, to those departments, to support them if they need radios or if they need personal protective equipment or they need breathing apparatus or they need prevention materials. They can apply for a grant from us. We give them the funding, and then they can purchase their equipment that they need. We also support wildland fire training. This is generally free to our fire departments across the state, and it's based on the national standards that are out there for fighting wildland firefighting. So as you see here in this picture, with the guy with the saw there, that tree's on fire. How do you cut that tree down with a chainsaw so you can put a line in there and get the containment on that fire safely? And it's not just about chainsaws and fighting fires that way. It's about how do you do it when you have an engine and you're working that engine, or how do you do it when you're a hand crew and you're building a hand line around a fire or equipment. So it's all training that's offered for our volunteer fire departments across the state to help them prepare for wildland fire. Another aspect of that is you see the truck in the upper right corner there. That's called a HEMT, and what that is a piece of equipment that we acquire through The federal government, it was considered excess property at the time. We pick it up and bring it into the state. We have a fire shop that does the maintenance and make sure it's roadworthy. And then it goes out to the departments. It's on loan to the department for as long as they'd like to have it. And when they're done with it, it gets turned back to us and it may go out to another department, or if it happens to be that it's out of date and can't be used again, then it'll be sold at auction to highest bidder. But right now I think we have about equipment in about 360 fire departments across the state. And again, that's on loan to them for as long as they want them and as long as they need them. Our prevention program is similar on the reporting side as it is for the volunteer firefighters assistance program, but we do track how many prevention activities happen across the state. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. And then there's the aviation program. So what this is across the state, there's 22 um, aerial applicators that have signed up to be available to fight fires on call when needed across the state. So they have their aircraft and they will fly water out of it usually and be available to support any fire in the state when they're called on. And the process for that is it starts with the emergency chief asking the emergency manager to make the request, and then those aircraft are up and heading to the incident pretty quickly. Today, we've had a little over 1,100 fires in the 2024 wildfires in 2024 in Nebraska. These fires, and the reason I say today, we've got 2 more days of reporting that is yet to be recorded. So it's going to be a little bit higher than that, depending on how many departments have not done their reporting yet. But we've also burned about 115,000 acres in the state in these wildfires. In Nebraska, over 90% of our wildfires are caused by people. And it could be something as simple as driving down the highway and pulling your trailer and dragging your chains on the highway, which creates sparks as you go along. It could be something as like parking a vehicle that has a hot catalytic converter on grass. Sometimes it's an accident that's associated with a rollover on a UTV or something like that. So here in the next couple of years, we're really going to try to make a push to bring that number down. We're higher than the national average, and we don't like that. We'd like to be well below the national average. And if you think about it, if we were able to reduce that number of fires by 10%, that's 100 less fires that our departments have to respond to. Forest Products is the one program that's mandated by state law. And what we do is we work with individual businesses, organizations to increase the state sustainable use of Nebraska's forest products, whether it's in the community or whether it's in a rural forestry setting. And there's been a few unique uses of forest products in the state. Out here in the upper right, you have your traditional timber harvest where you have logs that have been removed from the forest. Those will end up in a commercial sawmill and be trucked to that location and utilized there or cut into lumber that you might buy at your typical lumber store. If you move to the left, you see a building there, and that building is the start of construction for a cabin that was being built out at Cedar Point, which is a university property where students go out and do different research projects. So what they did is they harvested eastern red cedar off of the property. They milled it into um, boards here, and they've built this structure, and they're building several of those out there. Just below that is a table, and what that table is, and we have a program we call Sawmills for Schools, and it really grew out of this table right here. And we had a opportunity to work with the city of Lincoln and Lincoln High School to take some logs off of one of the properties that we manage and get some additional logs from the city of Lincoln. And these happen to be ash. And take those logs, create boards, take those boards down to Horning State Farm where we have a drying kiln. We dried those, and then the lumber was given to Lincoln High School where their industrial education um, teacher worked with students to create some various different kinds of furniture. And the nice thing about this was um, the wood didn't cost the students any money to purchase. The wood was donated, so if a student didn't have the funds to build their own or buy the wood for that table, then they could get some wood from this program and build a table, and they could keep the product when it was all said and done. So from that, we've developed our Sawmills for Schools program, which Gearing, Shadron, Ainsworth, and soon to be South Sioux City all have sawmills and kilns and are doing the same type of thing where they're connecting the students back to this tree came from this location. Now we're making lumber out of it. Now we're drying it. Now we're making a piece of furniture out of it. So kind of brings together that life cycle of the wood there. In the lower left there is an air curtain burner. And you know, when you harvest trees, and even if they go to a traditional sawmill, you still have waste material that can't be used for a sawmill. So what's happening down here, and this happens to be up around Shattern, is they're taking that waste material and they're creating biochar with it, and it goes into the air curtain burner and with the crane you see there, and on the other end, biochar is the end product that can be used as a soil amendment um, in this particular case in the community. And then down here on the lower right is a um, unit that takes the waste material from a smaller production mill and uses the waste material to kiln dry their lumber that they sell in their store. So um, different ideas and different things that are happening out there. And we also have some properties that we manage. I mentioned Horning State Farm, which is a research site to look at various different species that are out there that maybe could be future trees for Nebraska. The site's 240 acres, and it's managed strictly for the research side. And once a year, we have our forest festival in the early fall, and we invite anybody that would like to go out there and see what's happening to come out to the property and visit it and talk about the different activities out there. Also have Timmis Farm, which is a research site that we manage down on the Missouri River. That site is strictly research and primarily um, it looks at trees, but that's not its main focus. Reptile studies is something that's commonly done down there. And then Cedar Canyon out by Maxwell is another one. It's a heavily stocked area with eastern red cedar that we demonstrate different types of management for eastern red cedar up in that area. Now in Nebraska, or when we talk to our neighbors around Nebraska and some on the East Coast and the West Coast, they typically think our Nebraska National Forest looks like this. And we all know that's not the case. They're missing out. And when we look at the state, we really have about 3 million acres of forest and land with trees. So this happens to be a map of forest cover showing there, but a lot of different types of forest type. What's cool about Nebraska is we bring all of the influences from around us into the state, and everything meets right here in Nebraska, just like it should. So we have our ponderosa pine up here in the Northeast. We have ponderosa pine meeting eastern hardwoods here in the Niobrara Valley. We have the furthest eastern extent of ponderosa pine up in the Burwell area. We have limber pine out in the Panhandle. We have influences of the South and Southwest with the cedar, East Red Cedar and Rocky Mountain juniper forests. We have our oak woodlands in the southeast part of the state, and then we tie it all together with our riparian forests that are out there. So as we look around the state, lots of interesting things happen. So up here in the Niobrara Valley, we have oaks meeting ponderosa pine. We have boreal forests with aspen and paper birch showing up in this area. And this doesn't happen in just everywhere. It's unique to us. And we do have ponderosa pine overlapping with eastern red cedar, and our oak, walnut, ash woodlands tying into our cedar or into our ponderosa pine forest. So lots of cool things going on here, and lots of different mixes of forest types. When we drill down into it a little bit, we have this place called Halsey National Forest up in the central part of the state, next to Halsey. We have Bessie Nursery up there, and unfortunately, fortunately, the pictures were taken before the fire, but this area has changed. About 30,000 acres of that original forest, hand planted forest, is not there anymore because of fires. But what's interesting about it was, back in the early 1900s when this area was planted, the it was rangeland to start with, and we have this largest hand planted forest here in Nebraska. Had a fire in there, so a major disturbance, and you start seeing regeneration, natural regeneration happening in some of these areas where red oak and jack oak or jack pine, I'm sorry, and red pine and ponderosa pine are coming back in some of those burned areas. So the experiment continues in that area. We look at the woodland forest, the oak woodland forest along the Missouri River that string up through the Elkhorn and Loop River system and into the Blue River system. And we start seeing chinkapin oak and hickories and locusts and hackberries and showing up in these various areas. And as we move further to the west, we have bur oak that shows up in abundance. So very, very, very interesting forest. And then, like I said, we tie it all together with 80,000 miles of river systems. And in those river systems, we have our riparian forests. And in our braided forests of the Platte, or rivers of the Platte, we see what we would call elm ash cottonwood galleries. So those are the primary species, but you also have hackberry, peach leaf willow, honey locust showing up in those canopies. Up in the Niobrara Valley, we have our oaks and our ponderosa pine coming together. But we have challenges in our state as well, as we all know. We have the wildfire issue that is out there. We're never going to get completely away from wildfires, but maybe there's some things we can do to reduce our exposure to that. Prescribed fire is a great tool to use in Nebraska. It has to be done under the right circumstances in the right area with the right people. But prescribed fires out there. We know the weather and the climate in Nebraska is not real favorable to trees. We have 60, 70 mile an hour winds at times, and we have late season snows that happen on hardwood species that have their leaves already out, and that snow is heavy and wet and it breaks their trees off. We do have eastern red cedar, which is the native species, but it encroaches into places that we don't want to have that. There are issues around T&E, threatened and endangered species, that create some policy issues from time to time on when activities can happen and when they can't happen, and having clarity around those issues is pretty important. Here's an example of the first one I mentioned was wildfire. So if you look at the red outline, those are fires that either burned in 2006 or 2012 up in north west Nebraska, up near Chadron. And Chadron's right in the top center of this um, aerial photo. Off to the west is Crawford. Off to the east on Highway 20 there is Hayes Spring, and if you go south, you run into Hemingford and down towards Alliance. But those fires burned right to the edge of Chadron, and in all honesty, it took some heroic effort out of firefighters to keep it out of town and keep it from burning in the city there. But over the years, in 2006, people started to recognize that, we need to do something here. If we don't want this to happen again, then we all need to chip in together and find a way to make the communities, and this is true in any of our communities across Nebraska, but in this particular case, Chadron, more resilient to wildfire. It's not really a question of if there's going to be another wildfire, it's really when. So there's been various fuels treatments projects that have happened up here, and it originally started on the 385 corridor, and it required partnerships from the NRD. It required partnerships with the U.S. Forest Service, the Nebraska Forest Service, with private landowners, with NRCS and Game and Parks to start working on doing fields management in along the 385 corridor there, and even beyond that, looking out further from the community and looking at some of the resources that were still there that were a high priority for the community. These darker green patches of forest that are still out there. Recognizing that if we didn't do something, then we're going to be in the same boat somewhere down the road. And you can see the blue ones are projects that are done on the Forest Service. The tan ones are Nebraska Forest Service on private lands, and the green ones are on Game and Parks land. So we've all been working together trying to make a difference out there, and really this 385 corridor is much better shape than it was years ago. And there was actually a start up here last year on that. And the fire chief recognized and mentioned that he was really glad that work had taken place to allow them to catch that fire and keep that fire on the ground. Just one more quick picture of Shadron. You can see this. This is the college there. It burned right to the practice field. Sea Hill is on the far right side of the burned area, and that's what it looked like there. Looking at that a little bit further and what we're doing across the state to help manage some of these issues is this upper left is a picture from northeast part of the state, and that was a solid line of cedar that came up and tied into the stuff on the right side of the path that runs through there. But what we're doing here is creating a buffer strip or an area we'd call a fire break. And this was the first phase of it. So if there was a fire, we could come in here and send a piece of equipment down that fire line and create a fire line along that break. The next part of this is to go in to the cedar forest on the left and thin that out. So if there's a fire in here, that fire drops to the ground before it gets to our field break. And then on the right side, we'd go in there and clean out all the cedars from underneath the hardwood forest and create a shaded field break on that side. And in the lower left here, we see a picture of hardwood stand where we've done exactly that and gone in and cleaned out all the cedar trees. And in this case, we chipped them in place. Right side photo shows what happens when you're in a ponderosa pine forest and you thin out those trees so you don't have continuity of fields from the ground to the crown. And as we look at the cedar problem, you notice there's cedar trees here in this property down by Maxwell, and they're mostly on the south slopes. Jump ahead and you start seeing them on the west slopes, and eventually you start seeing them up on all slopes. And what we saw from 2005 to 2010 was about an increase of about 40,000 acres a year of lands that were transitioning from rangeland to forest. With the different activities that are happening across the the state, that's leveled off, and we're actually seeing a slight decrease in the number of acres of eastern red cedar. One thing we did in 20 this here is where our ponderosa pine forest meets our eastern red cedar forest, and you can see how they've come in and started growing underneath the pine. What we will do in here is go out and remove the cedar from underneath the pine and keep the pine forest. One thing we recognized back in 2017 was that the gray areas here is where we had community wildfire protection plans. And these plans, what they allow us to do is apply for grant funds that can be used for different activities out there across the landscape. And in 17, we started writing plans for all the yellow areas. And now the entire state is covered by a community wildfire protection plan. So we can go out and apply for grants to work with landowners to help make their properties a little more defensible. And if you look at this picture on the left, you'll see a couple houses in there. And under the circumstances, those houses are in pretty risky shape if there was a wildfire. Excuse me. So our fields treatment program started back in 2002. I think our first projects were 150 acres that year. And with the increased eligibility of areas, we've seen this continue to treat more and more acres of forests across the state to help them make make them more resilient. So um, we intend to continue this program, continue our grants. I think we have funding right now for every corner of the state. So if a landowner wants to participate in the program, we will be happy to work with them. And with that, I'll go ahead and thank you all for being here and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, John. That was super interesting. I'm always interested in learning more about fire. It's just fascinating and also a little bit scary. Okay, so Austin is asking, are there grant programs, funding sources separate from NSA that Forest Service offers for urban and community forestry, or some good contacts to reach out to about this?
The answer is yes. There are grant programs for communities that are separate from NSA, and we work a lot together on programs to make sure we have opportunities to serve the communities. But with that said, there's funding for that. I would reach out to Christina Hoyt, and she can help you out, or you certainly can reach out to Michelle or Toby or anybody, and we can make that connection.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Austin, you can certainly email us and we can get you connected with the right people. Lori is asking about how the number of fires in 2024, which I think you said was about 1,100 and counting, how that compares to previous years, 2023 and 2022.
Um, it's probably a little bit lower than the previous couple of years. Our worst year, am I still here?
Yeah, you're here.
Our worst year that we've had was about 2,800 fires. Typical year would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 850. But I don't have the numbers for the last 2 years right off the top of my head, but it's probably a little bit lower than the last 2 years.
Good. Moving in the right direction. Bruce Huffman would like to know if the Forest Service keeps any rating on the condition of windbreaks within the state.
We have done a couple of studies on the windbreaks across the state. The last one being, I think, in 2019, and rated the overall condition of the windbreaks. It was a joint effort with the U.S. Forest Service to get an idea on how dense our windbreaks are, what condition they are, the approximate age, and how many were in need of renovation.
Okay. I'm not super clear about this question, but I think what Roger's asking is, he says, are urban forests of Sarpy, Douglas County something of interest to the Forest Service? So I think he's asking, he talked a lot about some of the smaller towns and wildland fire and rural parts of Nebraska. So what about urban parts of Nebraska?
Yeah, our urban and community forestry program reaches across every community in the state.
Mhm. And I know Graham Herbst is our Eastern Community Forester and is doing a lot of work with folks in Douglas, Sarpy counties and other counties in that area. Let's see, there's a couple more down here. Dean would like to know if the Forest Service is working with agriculture partners in addressing farmers planting from fence row to fence row and wiping out a number of trees, especially in southeast Nebraska along the Blue River.
We work with, we do work with the Department of Ag, specific to removal of windbreaks. There is not a program right now that says they can't do that. What we do try to do, and we offer cost share to help with this, is reestablish windbreaks. We work with folks to renovate windbreaks and try to improve the overall health of windbreaks. And of course, we um, very much try to promote windbreaks as a tool for agriculture and for the environment as well.
Bruce's follow-up question about the ratings on the condition of windbreaks, he's asking, is the data available? And was the reporting done by district?
I think it's done by county, if I remember right. And um, we have the data, or at least we have the results of the data that I could share with you, Bruce.
Thanks. And I actually have one question. So, just in light of what we've seen in LA over these past few weeks, are there lessons that we can learn from what happened there? And are they applicable to Nebraska? Are you all observing what's going on there and thinking about how that might relate to the fires that we fight here? Is it relatable at all?
Yeah, it's very much relatable. If we go back to last spring, the Betty's Way fire that started out by North Platte um, burned about 70,000 acres in 5 hours and had 60 some mile an hour winds behind it. The in my opinion, I guess I would say that the only reason we didn't lose any communities was one, our firefighters that were out there on the ground, and these are primarily volunteers, but two, um, in as the sun went down, the wind slowed down, the humidity came up, and they were able to catch those fires. If we were in a situation where we had 100-mile-an-hour sustained winds that ran red flag conditions for days, we would certainly be susceptible to that. Here in the eastern part of the state, we have landowners that have center pivots, and those could help us a lot. But that's not true everywhere. And one of the things I think we should start asking ourselves is, do we really want to have our homes as close together as they are in some of our communities? In LA, with those types of winds, I'm sure when one house was burning, it was preheating the house 4 down from it. That makes that house more susceptible to starting on fire. And if you look at different parts of some communities, the houses are what, 15, 20 feet apart, maybe less than that. And
Mhm.
if you had those types of winds, it would very much be a risk for us.
Mm.
So with that said, we're working with really trying to modify the fuels that are in and around our communities, and kind of like Shattern there, where you're looking miles out from the community to try to get that fire on the ground so you can catch that fire before it gets anywhere close to the communities. And that's something that will need to continue to happen in Nebraska to keep us from ending up in a situation where we have a fire burning through a community.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much, John, for spending your time with us this afternoon. We know you have a packed schedule, so we appreciate your time and energy here with us today. And then for everyone else, our next plant talk is February 6th. We will have NSA Sustainable Landscape Specialist Sarah Buckley and Brad Kindler here talking about how to plan and plant a landscaping project. So that should be a good one as well. So thank you all for coming by today, and I'll send out the link to the recording a little bit later on, and have a great day. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone.